Hi, this is Mike Carter with Carter Custom Knives. Today I'm going to show you how I put some brass bolsters on one of my fancy daggers. So what I've got here is one of my daggers. It's already ground, heat treated, the blade's polished, so I've got it protected with some blue tape. And I've already drilled it for my handle pins, which I'm going to put big pins here and here. I'm going to put some smaller pins here. But these 4 holes back here and these 4 holes up here are going to be for brass bolsters. And I've got them cut roughly to shape, so I'm going to have brass back here on the end like this. And then I'm going to put some brass bolsters up front here like this. That will be ground down to fit the contour of the blade here. So we'll show you how we do this. Okay, I've got my blade here, and if you can see it, I have stamped 1 and 2 on the sides of this blade. And I've got my brass bolsters cut out, and these are cut roughly to shape, but likewise they are stamped 1 and 2. And the reason I do that is, things may not be perfectly symmetrical. So when I drill my holes, they might match up perfectly if it's on the correct side, maybe not if it's on the wrong side. They should, but just to keep things straight, I find it better to mark them and know what side you're working on. So what I've done is I cut these, I traced what I needed on a piece of brass, 1/8 inch thick brass stock, cut it out roughly to shape, marked where one of my holes would be, and drilled my first hole. Then what I do is just put a pin in that to hold it in place, and then I drill my other holes, actually drilling right through the holes in my tang, using it as a guide. Once you've got your second hole drilled, this isn't going to move. So drill your next 2 holes straight down through the tang, through the brass, and you'll have 4 holes that are perfectly aligned with your tang. Once I've done that on both sides, I'll have my 2 bolsters. I'll pin those together like so. Then take them to my disc grinder and put them up against that flat of the disc grinder and make sure I grind these down perfectly straight and even with each other. I also want to make sure that they're going to be straight across the blade to where I want them. So you get that all shaped ahead of time. Same thing with the front bolsters, that I pin those together and shape them perfectly even together, and in this case both edges. And what I'll do before I actually assemble this is I'll go ahead and polish these edges that will be showing here. And the reason I do that is because it's just real hard to get in here and polish this edge afterwards, after it's all attached, without messing up the polish I've already got on my blade. And being brass, it's very easy to polish. I've already got them pretty much shaped the way I want them. You can see they'll be ground to fit these contours after I get them all attached. So I'm just going to go ahead and clean up these edges a little bit. And as I said, being brass, it's pretty easy. Get the scratches out. I'll touch them on the buffer. So I'll come back when I get these polished up here. Okay, I've polished up the leading edges of these front bolsters, because these are the ones that are going to be positioned like this. And as I said, it's just real hard to get in there and polish them up and clean everything up after it's attached. So I'll go ahead and polish those up now. Now we're just about ready to fit everything up. I've got one more step. I've got all my pins cut here. I'm going to take a tapered reamer. And this is just very slightly tapered where it's thicker back here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to run this through all of these holes and just slightly enlarge the outer edge of that hole. And the reason I'm going to do that, when I put my pin in, I'm going to peen these pins. And when I take a ball peen hammer and hammer it down, it's going to expand and fill that slightly larger end of the hole, which will fill any gaps. When I grind it down flush, it should just disappear. Plus, it will also lock that bolster in place, because it's going to be a little fatter here on this end. So we'll do that next. We'll go ahead and ream these holes with a tapered reamer. Doesn't take much, and this reamer is just taking very little off. Okay, now we're about ready to start fitting things up here. So I've got my number one side of my blade here. I'm going to take my front bolster, my number one bolster, put it in place, and start putting some pins through it. And they're a good snug fit, which is what I want. Now we start peening the pins. I'm using the rounded end of a ball peen hammer. This kind of mushrooms the head of the pins and spreads them out. It actually expands the diameter of the pin as it's compressed. Work one side and then the other until you have both ends of the pin flattened out against the bolster. You don't have to hit it real hard. Multiple medium blows works better than a couple of real hard blows. You can see how the ends of the pins have expanded. Also notice how I'm working off the corner of my anvil here, so I'm just working on one pin at a time. Now we have the front bolster all pinned down real good. You can tell it's a real tight fit now. So now we'll work on the rear bolster and do the same thing on it. Now we have everything pinned down. Next step is to grind the pins flush and start trimming up the bolsters to fit the shape and the contours of the knife. I'm going to start off with a 220 grit belt. This brass is pretty soft, so it grinds easily. I'm working on an 8-inch wheel here on my Beta 3 grinder. And you can see the pins are starting to disappear. We've got the faces looking pretty good here. Even though this is a 220 grit, we will come back with a finer belt and clean them up a little bit more. Now we need to start working on shaping the bolsters closer to the knife tang. And I want to be careful here, especially since I've already done file work on the tang, that I don't want to hit this 220 grit belt against the tang. So I'm just going to get these down fairly close. Now we need to start working on shaping the contour of these front bolsters to the tang. In order to do this, I'm going to change from my 8-inch wheel to a little fork tip wheel. And here I have a 1/4-inch wheel mounted. I need to go to a 1-inch wheel, so I'll change those out real quickly. It's one nice thing about these Beta 3 grinders. Different arms and different wheels are quick and easy to change and set it up for just about anything that you need. And still using my 220 grit belt, we'll start taking off the excess brass here at the front bolster. Now that we've got them ground pretty close, I'm going to switch to a Trizec A16 belt, which is about 800 grit, and finish them up. This will smooth out any scratch marks I made in the brass, and also take it that last little increment where it's down flush with the tang. Now I'll switch back to the 8-inch wheel, still using the 800 grit Trizec belt, and I'll finish up the bolsters on the faces and edges. Just taking out those 220 grit scratches. And I think we have it pretty well finished, down to 800 grit, and we'll be able to polish it from there. But before I polish it, I'm going to go ahead and do some file work on the bolsters to match the vine file work that's on my tang. And I'll show you quickly how I do this. This vine pattern is really just 2 cuts repeated. I'm starting off with a round file, and I'm filing at about a 45-degree angle, both vertically and horizontally. And I'm just making a little round cut into it that's kind of swooping toward the rear of the knife. Now that I've got that cut made, I'll come back from the other direction with a little triangular needle file, and I'm just going to cut my little thorn into it. And this brass does cut pretty easily. The steel, I did my file work before I heat treated. bolsters are file worked with the same pattern as the knife tang. Okay, I think we've about got our file work done here. So now it's time to polish everything up. This is turning out really nicely. You really can't see where the pins are, which is exactly what we want. Okay, I think we've got all the scratches out of it with the black compound. So I'm going to just polish it up now on a little softer wheel with some green compound, and we'll have this thing just about ready to handle. We're getting there. Okay, so we have our piece ready for handles here. You can see how I did my brass bolsters. Can't see any pins in them at all. It just brass disappears into the brass. And I showed you how I do some of my vine file work. So now we're ready for handles. This is Mike Carter with Carter Custom Knives. Again, thanks for watching. Be sure to watch my next video where I'll show you how I put some really nice Mammoth ivory handles on this knife.